morning. It is finally June. Look at this weather. It's absolutely spectacular. I always find by the time I get to June, I feel like we're kind of coming to the end of the sowing, but there are some things which is perfectly fine to wait till this late, and particularly if you're in a colder area, there's loads of things that now is the first sowing you can sort of do, and that's the same with Brassicas. I'm going to go through them all. But it's also a time to not forget about repeat sowings. So just about now, when things start looking like they're really taking hold and that they're going to be kind of coming good soon, is when you need to start thinking about sowing the next lot. So for example, I have got 1 million lettuces up there which are just starting to look really nice. They're kind of really strong in the ground, and in a couple of weeks time I'll start picking those, and it's now that I need to start sowing for the next lot, because otherwise I'm going to have all of those lettuces and I'll eat them all and then I won't have any more lettuces to come. So this is like prime. So June, July, August is the kind of starting to think ahead of sowing sort of time. So there's masses to sow in June, but I'm going to start with the ones which this could easily be the first sowing of. So things like beans. I've only just got my beans in about 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, but they're already about this high. They start so quickly. If you sow them really early in the year, as I have done a couple of years, I've been lucky with the weather, managed to get them out and they've been fine. But if I'd sown them really early this year, it just would have been a complete disaster, because we had such a terrible spring. They would have been inside and just completely wrapped around each other, and then by the time I got them out, they would have had really terrible transplant shock and just sulked for a long time. So I waited a long time this year. Like I sowed my beans about a month later than I would normally this year. So you just kind of judge it on the year. But this year it is like, this is kind of peak time to sow beans. So that's all of the sort of summer beans, not the broad beans. It's a bit late for broad beans. But you've got French beans. So this year, I've talked about this when I was sowing the beans, but this year I'm doing 3 types of French bean, which is a purple one called Violetto. I'm doing a yellow one called Necker Gold, and I'm doing a green one called Cobra. So they're going to go up my arches on that side. And so that's 3 types of French bean. They're all climbing, but you can do dwarf ones as well. I just prefer them to be climbers, because I find with the dwarf ones, they don't outgrow the black fly quick enough and they just get mullered. So I always do climbing beans where I can. I'm also sowing my runner beans at the moment. I'm doing a variety called Moonlight. I would show you the packet, but as you can see, it's a bit screwed up and held together with an elastic band. So I won't show you that one. And I'm also doing a couple of beans for drying. So they're all for fresh eating. And I'm going to do a couple of beans for drying, which are Greek Gigantes, which are a magnificent bean from Real Seeds. They are actually a type of runner bean, but they're really fat, and you dry them and use them like butter beans, and they are magnificent. And the other one I'm doing is a Belotti. So normally I grow a variety which I get from Frankie Seeds called Belotto. Put it in the list underneath. I normally grow that one, but I couldn't get hold of any at the right time this year. So I'm growing speckled cranberry as my Belotti bean this year. So we'll see how good they are, because normally the Belotti beans are a real highlight for me. So I hope they're as good. But yeah, so June, if you haven't got your beans in already, now's a good time for beans. And talking about kind of the beans family, the legumes, I'm going to be putting my second sowing of peas in now. So I've got 1 load of peas growing. I don't know if you can see them, they're about there. They are just about 2 foot high and they're flowering like crazy. That's also for the Mange 2 and the tall telephone peas. So I've got all 3 pea varieties in that I did a good few months ago now, and I'm just about to put a second load in. I will pre-soak them and grow them exactly the same way. The only difference is that I'm going to grow them in a shadier spot. So the peas don't really love burning in the hot sunshine, and the ones that we grew at the beginning of this year have absolutely loved the weather. They started off a bit slow, but they've loved the really cool wet weather, and they're just doing fantastically. But they're in a really full sun bed. So the second sowing of peas I'm going to do in a shadier bed, and they should be absolutely fine. Oh, the variety I'm doing this time around is Hurst Green Shaft. That's going to be my second sowing. And talking of shade, this time of year, sometimes things that you could have grown out in the full sun earlier in the year, you want to give them a bit of protection now. So I don't know if you remember the Pak Choi that I grew. I planted them out really, really early, about February, I think I planted them out, and we've eaten them all now. They were absolutely fantastic, but they were in full sun. I'm just about to sow some more. I'm probably going to direct sow them, and I'm going to sow them up in the shady bed, the same one that I'm sowing my peas in, and that also goes for spinach. True spinach, not chard. The true spinach has a real tendency to bolt if you're planting it right in the hot part of the year. So if you're planting it, I mean, it does depend on the year. Sometimes Junes are pretty cool, but this one looks like it's going to be really hot. So I'm going to get my spinach into the shady bed, and I'm going to do them, probably start them in plugs, but I might just direct sow some as well, because last year we had loads of success with the direct sowed stuff. And I'm doing a Monopa, Mediana and Americana. These are all true spinaches, and I will get them in probably this week, so the first half of June, and then I'll do another sowing of them at the beginning of July, depending on the weather. I said spinach, not chard. I'm also going to be sowing chard in this month. This is a fantastic month for growing chard. We're just finishing off eating what we had over the winter, and we're going to give ourselves a bit of a break, so we'll have probably about 2 months where we don't have any chard to pick, and then we'll be back on the chard train. So the chard that I'm growing this year, last year was the first year that I grew this Lucullus, and it's been fab. It's quite different from the other chards because it's really soft, so it cooks down more like a spinach than a chard. So I'm going to be putting some of that in. Also going to be doing Bright Lights, which is the classic rainbow chard, just because it's fab. And then there's Forge Hook Giant, which was that one that I took out of the polytunnel a week ago that was absolutely massive. That was a great chard. So I'm going to be doing a mixture of those three. One of the chards that I really wanted to grow this year is called Peppermint Chard, which is like a pink and white stripy stemmed one, but I couldn't get hold of any seed, so I'm not doing it, but I'll try again next year for that one. And then I'm doing two, so things that are called perpetual spinach are actually a chard, like a Beeta chard. So I'm going to be doing two of them. I've got like classic perpetual, and I'm also doing the Beeta, which is a Frankie Seeds version, which is fairly similar to the perpetual, but it just gets a bit bigger, and both are absolutely delicious. And you know my feelings about chard, so I will not be skimping on the numbers. It is still not too late to start off some of the cucurbits. Some of the cucumbers say it's a bit late by now, but most of the things like the courgettes and the marrows and the patty pans, all of that kind of stuff, still plenty of time. Even some of the pumpkins are absolutely fine to go out now. I planted mine about a month ago. I lost a couple of courgettes, so I will be sowing some replacements for them this month. They'll just be sort of a bit slower, but if we're going to have the really fantastic late end of summer that I think we're going to have, we should be fine with them. June is also a fantastic time to sow sweet corn. I've sown mine last week. Nothing showing yet. I didn't pre-soak it. Sometimes you can pre-soak sweet corn. Some people absolutely swear by that, but I've never found that I have a problem with sweet corn germination. They don't like being transplanted particularly, so most years I would put them into root trainers or really deep pots, but this year I'm going a bit gung-ho and I've just put them in a really shallow tray. I'm going to transplant them when they're still really quite tiny. That's because I'm sowing them at this time of year. Other years I've sown them kind of early May, and then by this time they're pretty big plants, and if they were really big plants I don't want to be disturbing their roots because they hate it. But I'm trying a slightly different strategy this year. They're sown out in a seed tray, and I'm only going to wait for them to kind of come up this big before I transplant them. And they are going to be living in the fruit cage this year, which will protect them from the badgers. You normally have to build a massive construction around the sweet corn to stop the badgers, so they're going in there this year, so that should be pretty good. Some years I sow sweet corn in 2 waves, so I would sow some like mid-May and some mid-June. This year I'm just going bang in the middle and sowing the whole lot at once. They're not an F1 variety, so they should have a staggered sort of production anyway. Something else to sow in June is fennel. Now, Mum absolutely loves Florence fennel, and we don't normally have a great deal of success with it. We tend to get really skinny bulbs, but even the skinny bulbs are still absolutely delicious. I think we don't plant them far enough apart. You're supposed to plant them in rows about 45 centimeters apart, and to be perfectly honest, we just don't do that. We sow them really close together and we end up with these very sort of skinny fennel bulbs, but they are absolutely delicious. They don't go woody, and we're probably going to carry on with that technique rather than trying to go for the really massive fat white bulbs that you have to earth up to keep them white and everything. Too much fuss. We're just going to sow our Florence fennel direct in the ground and thin it out a little bit, and then much closer, so they'll probably be 25 centimeter rows rather than 45, and we'll see how that goes. These ones are going to go into full sun. It's also time to start sowing some of the Brassica crops, which you'll be eating either right at the very back end of this year or early spring next year. So that's things like kales. So I'm growing 3 different kales this year. I'm doing 2 curly ones, which is a red one and a green one. They're just called Scarlet and Dwarf Green Bush. So this green one is the dwarf one that I grew last year that I poo-pooed all year, and then it absolutely came into its own this spring. So I'm actually going to give it another go, having been quite disparaging about it all last year. I'm also doing a Cavallonero, which is like a Tuscan kale. I've got 9 plants in at the top bed already that I sowed in January, and they're going to be the ones that we're going to be eating from the second half of this year, kind of into the winter. And these chaps will start now, let them get really well established, and then they'll feed us from like November onwards all the way through till spring, all the way through until like the beginning of May next year. So we should have the full year of those. So it's also time for Calabrese and Romanesco and that kind of the head forming broccolis. We grew the Calabrese, this one, last year, and it was quite successful. We got a really decent sized head off the middle and then the sprouts afterwards, but I didn't feel, for the amount of space that it took up and the length of time, I didn't feel it was that productive, and I'm going to go more for the tender stem stuff this year. I've already got my purple sprouting broccoli on the go. I planted that last month, so it's definitely time for Calabrese, but we're not going to be doing it this year. Having said that, the fractals broccoli, the Romanesco, took up the same amount of space, same amount of time, but I just found it such a joy to grow that I'm going to be doing it again. I would say last year was the first year that we've grown it. It isn't, but it was the first year that we were successful actually forming a head, and I absolutely loved it, so I'm going to be doing that again. You just got to make a judgment call on what you want to use your space. We've all got limited space, so just got to make a decision, and that's mine. Sticking with Brassicas, but moving on to more successional sowing stuff, I am going to be sowing another row of Kohl Rabi. I am obsessed with Kohl Rabi. It was so good last year. This will be my 3rd sowing of it. Mum's getting a bit panicky that we're going to be inundated with Kohl Rabi, but I can't help myself, so I'm going to be doing a 3rd load of that. And then it's on to things like I'm going to be doing my 3rd sowing of the carrots as well. I've been doing them 2 rows at a time every month. I was going to do every 3 weeks, but I realised I was going to run out of space because the first stock took so long to get going because of the weather. So I'm doing them every month. This will be my 3rd month. I did March, 4th month. March, April, May, June. This will be the next one. I'm doing a carrot called Touchon, which is my absolute favourite, and also a white carrot, Jaune d'Obtus, I think it's called. That makes it sound like it should be yellow, but I think it's a white one. Anyway, that's the one I'm doing. I'll be getting them in this year. That is the same with beetroot. Will also be my 3rd sowing of beetroot. I'm doing 4 different beetroot varieties this year. Chogia, which is the stripy one. I'm doing Boldor, which is the yellow one, which is a yellow one. There's quite a few of them. And 2 Detroit series, Detroit Rubridus 6, and I think it's Scarlet Globe is the other one, but they're both Detroit series beetroot, so I'll be putting the 3rd wave of them in. Despite already having masses of spring onions, I will be putting 1 more row of spring onions in around now. It's about limit of when you can sow them, unless we're getting really cool weather, but I'm going to be putting 1 more row of Lilia, which is a spectacular bright red spring onion, so put them in. This will be my 4th sowing of spring onions, and the 1st sowing of them are just starting to come good now, so hopefully I should be still picking them like well into the summer from the June sowing. Turnips 2 is going to be 2nd sowing of turnips. I'm going to be doing purple top Milan, which is the classic white one with the pink top. I'm doing Snowball, which is all white, and I'm doing Petrovsky, which is yellow. I'm going to be getting them in this month as well. And in the theme of turnips, I'm also going to be putting another load of Cima di Rapa in. Cima di Rapa. Cima di Rapa? Cima di Rapa. This stuff. It is a sprouting turnip top, so it is a turnip, but you're eating the tops of them. There's quite a lot of different varieties, and they're named after how long they take to come good. So there is a 40-day one, there's a 60-day, 90-day, 120-day, I believe. And so far we've always grown them from about September, and then we eat them during the winter. But we're going to be trying a summer one. This is a 40-day one. It's the quickest one there is. We're just going to bang it in to the end of one of the beds and see if we can get a crop off it. It does say that it's perfectly fine to sow now, all the way up until September. So we're going to give that a go because this is just so delicious. And then, like I say, it's down to lettuces. So all of that sort of stuff, if you're growing cresses or mustard cress, or Pak Choi if you're growing them for salad leaves, spinach if you're growing them for salad leaves, any of the lettuces, it's now time to get in another wave. So this could even be your third wave. For me, it's the second, because I was a bit slow off the mark this year, but I've got about 9 varieties of lettuce that I'm growing, and I will put another like 2 or 3 of each in now. I'm not going to sow masses of them. I just like to keep as much variety as possible so that when you're picking for a salad, I grow quite a lot of pick and come again lettuce leaves, so that you pick them from all around the bottom and then you keep your heart. That's a really nice way of extending the season. So by doing 2 sowings, one in about early March and then one in June, you can kind of keep it going all summer, and then go again in September, October time, and that will keep you going through the winter. So I kind of split my lettuces up into 3. That's for the pick and come again stuff. If it's for the ones which actually heart up and you pick the whole lettuce off from the bottom, I tend to do them a bit more frequently, because you don't have that extended season from picking pick and come again kind of style harvesting. So I'll do them probably twice as often, but half as many, if you see what I mean. Yeah, and there's also, this is by no means a comprehensive list. There is so much that can be sown in June, and obviously it depends where you are. If you're further north than me, there's loads more stuff that I would have stopped sowing in May that you could sow now. And I haven't even touched on any herbs. Basil, coriander, all of those soft herbs can be sown now. I've just planted my first wave of basil into the polyhouse, and I'll be sowing another load this week. I've got the normal Italian basil, I've got a little tiny leafed Greek basil, and I have Thai basil. So I'm just going to keep sowing them over and over again all the way through the year. Parsley too. I sowed masses of parsley in February, so I probably don't think I need any more at the moment, because I've got like about 6 rows of it out there. But parsley definitely is on the list. Rocket, I'll be putting a bit more rocket in. God, there's just masses. Basically June is go. There's some things that don't like the June weather, stuff that needs the cool, and maybe it's worth, if you want to give them a go in June, is to try them in a shady bed, like I'm doing with the second sowing of the peas and the spinach and all of that kind of stuff. Yeah, so basically just sow like a crazy, thinking about late summer, because everything you've got going now is going to be eaten before that point, and then we get that patch where it's like, oh, fuck, I didn't sow them back then. So I'm on it this year. I've got my list ready. I'm going to sow everything, and yeah, I hope that was useful. It really is all about trying to remember to do the successional sowing around now. So most of the things that I've listed here today, you've heard me talk about in the other ones, because I've been sowing them repeatedly. But even if they're not your repeat sowing, even if it's your first sowing, it's in no way too late for any of these things as a first sowing. So yeah, get going. I'm going to list all the varieties that I've spoken about underneath. I'm trying to get better with this because I'm useless at it. I'm going to try for the ones that I do know where you can get them from, or there's somebody with a consistent supply, I will put links next to the varieties underneath. It is currently Thursday morning when I'm filming this, and it's coming out Thursday afternoon, so I better get myself in gear and get this edited and uploaded. And I'm going to do that all in the shed this afternoon, because the weather is just too beautiful to sit in the house. So I'm going to whiz home, have some lunch, get this edited, and it'll be out this afternoon, and then I will see you all on Tuesday. Got masses to do this week. Everything's popping off really quick. It's an incredibly exciting time of year. So I will see you all on Tuesday. Thanks guys. Bye.